everybody, and a really warm welcome. Thank you all for joining us for this, our first ever digital event from the Wildlife Trust and the Black Country. We have a number of people here joining us on Zoom live, and we are also streaming live on Facebook as well. So a big thank you to everybody for coming along, and nice to see so many people here. So this event that we're doing today is part of a number of events that we've got coming up, all around celebrating our 40th anniversary this year. And I'm Emma, I'm from the Wildlife Trust, and I'm going to be co-hosting this evening with my colleague Andy, who you'll be able to see shortly. So let's get started then. So I would just like to welcome my colleague Andy, and also welcome my colleague David, and Kate as well, our guest speakers. Hi.
I'm really sorry, it's raining. It started raining, so I've positioned myself at the door.
Well, you were very brave. You're sitting close to where it's raining. We are very, very hot up here in the Midlands. We haven't had the rain yet, so we're really quite warm at the moment. David, how's the weather where you are? You're in Spain at the moment, I believe.
Yeah, I'm in a place called Fastinash, sorry. I'm at the headquarters of my good friends, the Inglorious Bastards, and I'm down near Tarifa, which is near Gibraltar. So I'm just a stone's throw away from, well, massive stone's throw actually, from Morocco. And the temperature here is probably 34, and it's pretty bright. And I'm in the town sitting on the doorstep.
Oh, wow, lovely. Well, we can hear, is that sparrows we can hear in the background?
You can hear house sparrows, yes.
Fabulous, that's a lovely little bit of background.
And there's barn swallows nesting nearby as well. I just saw one earlier today, so I can see them flying around now. So there's one flying past now. Barn swallows, yeah.
Brilliant. It was some wildlife live on air. That's fantastic. Wonderful. Well, thank you to both to David and for Kate for joining us. I'm sure you all know who David and Kate are, but just a little introduction. So David Lindo, aka the Urban Birder, photographer, broadcaster, author, and Kate Bradbury is an award-winning wildlife gardening author. Some of you may have read sort of Kate and David's books, and Kate is really notorious for creating beautiful wildlife gardens. It's a shame it's raining where you are, Kate, so we can't actually see your beautiful garden.
I know. I might take you out later.
Okay, good plan. That sounds great. Okay, so I'm just going to hand over just very briefly to Andy just to share a few words on the City Nature Challenge.
Okay, so we're talking about urban wildlife, aren't we? So, and the City Nature Challenge really is all about getting out there and recording urban wildlife. So what the City Nature Challenge is a global citizen science competition between cities all around the world to see who can record the most wildlife over the 4 days. Birmingham, the Black Country, took part for the first time in 2020. I forgot what year it was then. It's 2020, isn't it? And there were 244 other cities taking part, including 10 other cities in the UK as well. So basically, we're seeing how much wildlife that we have compared to places like Cape Town, San Francisco, Sydney. So that happened in April, and everything was going great. We had lots of events planned, and then COVID-19 happened. So all of our events we had to cancel, and we had to kind of refocus on getting people to record wildlife in their gardens and on their local sort of walks that we were allowed at that point during lockdown. So we really had to refocus, but we were very lucky in that we had fantastic weather over the 4 days, and so we had lots of people going out recording wildlife. In fact, we had hundreds of people all contributing to this sort of citizen science project. So we had people with trail cams out in their gardens recording sort of mammals visiting. We had people recording their garden birds. We had people pond dipping, people out with bat detectors. And all in all, over the 4 days, we managed a whopping 16,000 wildlife records, and that was 1,300 different species, which I think is quite incredible for an area such as ours. You know, some of the other cities had coastlines and quite large natural areas where we were very focused on, well, strictly the urban area, really. So that was great fun. I think it was a great distraction almost from the situation that we found ourselves in with COVID-19. And there wasn't much else to do, let's face it, at the time. So I think people interacting with wildlife and learning more was a really good thing. I mean, overall in the world, if you're interested in league tables, though it wasn't really competition this year, obviously with the differing situations in different cities, we finished 14th in the world in terms of number of records, which is quite incredible. So that was a City Nature Challenge. Back to you, Emma.
Now it's time to have a little bit of a chat with Kate and with David. So David, you've been locking down in Spain at the moment, and we know from studies that nature has a really positive effect on our well-being. What kind of impact has connecting with nature and wildlife had on you during lockdown?
Well, it's kind of saved me from total extinction, to be honest with you, Emma, because in Spain, we didn't have quite the situation that you guys had in the UK, in that, for example, between the very beginning, which was in March, before you guys, about 2 weeks before you guys went into lockdown, until practically May, I think, we weren't even allowed out to do exercise. So it's like a visit to the shops once or twice a week, and that was it. And the shop for me was literally 5 minutes around the corner. So it was really tough. I have a sun terrace, and I was living in a city, or I am living in a city called Merida, which is the capital city of a region called Extremadura, which is the 5th largest region in Spain, despite the fact that no one's ever heard of it apart from birders. And the region, which is twice the size of Wales, borders Portugal. So on my sun terrace, I could only see rooftops, satellite dishes, and chimneys. And I had about maybe 35 to 40% sky, and that was it. So I spent an hour a day at least sitting and looking up. And during that period of time, I had about 39 different species, mostly birds of prey, but also things like white stork. And my local birds included blackbirds and spotless starling, which is this sort of southern Iberian oblique, like Italian species of starling, which is like the sister species of starling, related to our starling, and also greenfinches and serines. So I had local birds to keep me occupied and collared doves, but it was tough. And without that ability to get out there and actually get some nature, I would have really struggled. In fact, I did struggle. I did hit the wall a couple of times. But I think the mixture of sort of doing daily blogs or vlogs even online and seeing these birds and watching them in their daily lives really did help me.
So for you, that classic David Lindo catchphrase of "look up" really was really relevant to you in lockdown, and in terms of the effect that it had on you and your well-being.
I had to take my own medicine, which was gladly taken, by the way. But you know, it was really, because I think the hardest thing was I didn't realise how much it would affect me, because I thought I'd be strong and be fine. But I realised that you do need an injection of nature, and without it, you just can't function. Without it, you do become depressed. Without it, you know, the days become rolled into one. And I think that for me, give myself a challenge, which actually was a national challenge in Spain, which is just to see as many birds as possible from your lockdown position, gave me a purpose, other than sort of just existing. And it was great. I mean, just sitting there and looking up and seeing a swift fly over, it's like, it just brings so much joy to your heart. One morning, I got up early to listen to the dawn chorus, and it was incredible. There were like 15 blackbirds, male blackbirds, singing almost from every sort of high pinnacle around me, all at once. It was absolutely mind-blowing how, you know, the sound they were making it just lifted my heart so much, and it gave me so much strength for the rest of the day.
Well, that's really interesting you say that, because obviously Andy's just been sharing with us the experience that we've had here in our urban jungle in Birmingham in the Black Country, of so many people that connected with the City Night Challenge, and how that actually coincided with this crazy unprecedented global pandemic that we're facing at the moment. And Kate, we've got a bit of a question for you in respect of the health and well-being in regards to lockdown. We've had a great question from Sammy in Kidderminster, and that's all about connecting with nature in lockdown. And she asks us, people have noticed a lot more nature during their lockdown experiences. And she wants to know what you think the legacy of lockdown will be on the environment. So, for example, will it highlight the importance of green spaces to the government, and how can we continue to connect with nature post-lockdown? So that concept that nature is not just for lockdown, nature is for life. How can we continue?
I think that's a really interesting question. I mean, anecdotally, you know, a lot of my friends who live in flats with no outside space, you know, they've all said as soon as they can after lockdown, the first thing they're going to do is try and move somewhere with a bit of outside space, with a bit of a garden, nearer to a park. I think being locked up, especially for those who didn't have any gardens or outside space, it's made everybody realise how important nature is and the natural world is. And I think the legacy of lockdown, it has to be, and I really hope it is, that we just appreciate nature more. We appreciate being outside more. We appreciate gardens more. We look at things more. You know, so many people have been sort of tweeting me, messaging me about, you know, I've seen this. What's this? What's going on here? Because they've been at home, because they've had time to look. And that's just so heartening that suddenly lots of other people, particularly, you know, friends of mine who don't really have much connection with nature at all, have been seeing things and thinking about things and observing. And, you know, there's little observations, as David was saying, you know, they lift you. You know, just seeing a bird on a bird feeder in the morning, it lifts you. It just gives you that little lift, and no one can really fully explain it, I don't think, what nature does to us. Apart from just makes us happy. And those of us that know that, you know, I mean, I know that I will never have a garden without a pond again, because ponds make me so happy. I will never not grow wildflowers, because all the insects coming in make me really happy. But those who are only just starting to realise that now through lockdown, I hope that we as people who are trying to help fight biodiversity loss and climate change and all of that, we've got a wider audience to listen to us. And I also hope that the people who have been noticing stuff during lockdown continue to do so now. I hope that's the legacy.
Oh, that's just a really great way of looking at it, isn't it, really? That, you know, and we've certainly noticed that here at the Wildlife Trust. We've certainly noticed individuals who maybe hadn't connected quite so much with wildlife or with nature, especially in more urban areas. Like Kate and David, like you've both said, people have been noticing some of those small things more. And that actually leads me on quite nicely to have another little chat with Andy with regards to Eco Record. So Andy, will you tell us just a little bit more about Eco Record and the connection with the Wildlife Trust?
Well, yes, of course. Eco Record is the local record centre for Birmingham and the Black Country. Now, we're one of a number of record centres. We cover the whole of the UK pretty much. And the aim of Eco Record is to collect information about the wildlife of the area, manage it, and share that to anyone who's interested. And that data is useful for lots of different things. For example, the kind of information that was collected as part of the City Nature Challenge, you know, the information on a species and where it's been seen, that is really useful information, because it will not only tell us about the common species, but, you know, and how common they actually are. It will tell us about trends as well. And with climate change, we're seeing, you know, quite a few trends already with, you know, species some species declining, some species increasing in number. And also information on some of the rare species is really useful as well. It helps us to identify some of the most important sites in our area that need to be protected, and it helps us to identify ways that we can help to join up those sites to sort of better protect them, make them more robust, and especially climate change as well. So the information we collect can be used for lots of different things, and that information comes from lots of places. It comes from just people out there spotting wildlife in their gardens. It comes from professional surveyors. It comes from citizen scientists. And one of our roles is to encourage as many people out there as possible to go out and report their wildlife sightings to us and help them on that journey of learning how to identify species.
And how easy is that for people to do, Andy, to get involved with being a citizen scientist? How easy is it for people to get connected and to report and to record wildlife for us?
It's very easy. I mean, making a wildlife record isn't difficult at all. The key thing is to think about the information that we need, and that's what was seen, where it was seen, when it was seen, really. And we're on Twitter, we're on Facebook. So we get lots of people tweeting us and messaging us with brilliant photos of wildlife all over. It's just brilliant every day to log in and see what's been seen in different places around the area. But there's also this app that we really started only really using as part of the City Nature Challenge called iNaturalist, and that's great. Like you download it and you take a photo of something, and the software, it's like this. You get it a lot now. This kind of software that can recognise an image and then suggest what it is, and this is working sort of better and better with species now. So you can photograph a butterfly or a beetle, and it will give you an idea of what it is. It will not always be completely accurate, but with a lot of things now, it's coming up and it makes identifying things a lot easier, and you learn about lots of new species. So that kind of information submitted by the app also comes to us.
That's great. That's what we really want everyone to do in terms of connecting with your urban wildlife is to keep recording, really. Keep telling us about what wildlife you've seen out there. It is really important. Now we're starting to get some questions come through, so it's time to go through a bit of a quick question and answer session with David and with Kate. And so Kate, there's a couple of questions come through about creating a pond. So Laura would like to know if you have any tips for creating a wildlife pond. And we also have another question with regards to pond that's related. So somebody who actually has a pond already and has already added some oxygenated plants, but the water's still a little bit green with algae. So could you give us a little bit of some urban wildlife pond tips, Kate?
I can. So first of all, tips for creating a wildlife pond. I think the main thing to consider is to make sure that you have lots of shallows. So traditional books about digging ponds, they tell you to go down to 60 meters. 60 centimeters, and to not worry too much about having steep sides. And that's because until about 5 years ago, all pond books were written for people with fish ponds. And fish ponds need to be deeper so that the fish can hibernate in winter at the bottom of the pond, and that the depth doesn't completely freeze at 60 centimeters. But for a wildlife pond, you don't need that. And actually, the most life is in the shallow bits of the pond. You get all of the tadpoles and the newt efts and the aquatic larvae. So you get all the beetles sort of zipping around in the shallows. And by shallow, I mean sort of like 5 to 15 centimeters deep. So it really doesn't need to be very deep. So if, for example, you wanted to just make a small pond that was just 2 meters in diameter, you don't need to go to 60 centimeters, just go to 30 centimeters and then gradually, like a little bowl, just go up like that, because all of the life will be in this sort of vicinity around the edge. You'll get birds bathing. The shallow bits will enable hedgehogs to walk in and out safely. So hedgehogs in summer, particularly when it's really hot, they go for a little swim like we all like to do. And if in a steep-sided pond, they will get stuck and they can drown. So nobody wants to wake up in the morning and find a dead hedgehog in their pond. So just make it, the shallows are just so important, and they're so interesting as well. They're so fun. I just got back from my allotment earlier, and I had these little wriggles on my pond of these little things that I didn't recognise, and I just scooped my hand into the pond, and there were these little newt efts, and I've never actually seen a baby newt before. So yeah, literally I met my first baby newt about 2 hours ago, and that's because I've got a really shallow pond. So yeah, shallows. Now, as for the pond being a bit green, if it's a new pond, they will do this. They all go green. It's completely normal. I would avoid adding tap water, even though if you can, I know it's been very dry, and you probably want to be topping the pond up, but if you are topping up the pond, try and do it with rainwater from the water butt. And just get some, not pearl barley, some barley straw from the pet shop or the garden centre, and just pop that in. And it's a natural organic way of reducing the nitrogen. Algae growth is all about nitrogen. So the more plants you put in, the less algae there'll be. The more aquatic invertebrates you get, the less algae there'll be, because tadpoles and other aquatic invertebrates, they eat algae. But also, if you need a helping hand, just put some barley straw in. As the barley straw breaks down, it uses nitrogen in the water to break down, and that sucks out all the food for the algae and stops the algae growing.
Wow, that's some really good top tips there about the barley. Who knew that? That's fantastic. So everybody that's asked a question about ponds, we really hope that that's answered some of your questions. And I'm right in thinking, Kate, that even a small pond, even in a really urban area, can be really important. I mean, I live in a small
God, yeah,
and I have a very, very tiny, I can't really call it a pond, it's a bucket with some water in it, but the magpies love to have a bath in it, and there's lots of little larvae in there, so we're assuming that it's urban areas it's still really relevant for.
Yeah, I mean, you know, I live in a very urban area. I've got a 40-foot garden, and my pond takes up about a third of the garden. Now, I appreciate that most people probably wouldn't do that, but in my front garden, I've got like a little Belfast sink, which is basically a dog bowl, but hedgehogs use it as well, and I do get water snails and other things in there as well. So any water is good. Don't go too small, because then you'll basically only get mosquito larvae. But even in a Belfast sink, you'll get dragonflies laying eggs. So yeah, just, you know, anything.
Well, for everybody who's asking a pond question now, and Laura has just posted a message on the chat to say thank you, that was really helpful, and apparently her husband is going to get digging now. We would love, Laura, to see the photographs of your pond. Please do share them on Facebook and Twitter for us, that would be fab. And Kate, we're just going to go to David to ask a question. David, there was a question that came in with regards to swifts, actually. So people are noticing lots of swifts in urban areas. I mean, right now I can see swifts from my window, and they're busy all day long with screeching, and they're busy right from the early hours of the morning right to the end of the evening. And the question was that we know that swifts pretty much don't ever land, but what do they do at night?
That's a good question, actually. Well, a lot of them actually sort of go up in the sky, very high, and they basically drift around, and they have this mechanism where they can have half their brain asleep and the other half awake. So they're a bit of a sort of a trance, really. And if the turbulence happens or something like that happens, they kind of have a shock, then they'll wake up straight away. When they're nesting too, I believe that one of the adults may actually stay in the nest with the young as well. But sometimes when they're feeding their young, they may actually drift off and fly considerable distances to feed their young. And they might be away for a few days. And during that period of time, the young go into a torpor. So birds in Southeast England can end up in France. So yeah, during the night, they will go high up and they'll basically drift around and rest on the wing. It's amazing that they spend so much time on the wing, because I don't know if you know, but I do these webinars called In Conservation With, and I had one 2-3 days ago actually with the Swiss man of the UK, Edward Mayer, and he was giving us all this information on Swift. So that's why I'm glad you asked that question, because it's all fresh in my mind.
Ah, perfect. Well, that's really fascinating, because I'm often wondering, well, what do they do? They don't land, so what happens to them? Where do they go at night? That's brilliant. Andy, do we have any questions on the chat for Kate?
Yes, I mean, we've got quite a few questions about wildlife gardens here. We've got a question about lawns here from Karimat, and she's asking, would you recommend letting the grass and common flowers like dandelions and daisies grow rather than mowing? And if so, to what extent? I want to attract wildlife, but I don't want the garden to get out of control. So where's the balance there?
Where's the balance? Well, I have got a meadow instead of a lawn, so I'm probably the wrong person to ask. I trim my meadow. I keep my meadow mown until after the alliums have flowered. So I don't know if you grow alliums, Karima, but it's quite important for me to have a quite neat lawn, so I can have all my spring flowers coming up, and it can all look very sort of tidy and uniform. And then after the alliums have finished flowering, I just let it go. And currently it's about sort of shoulder height. So I've got grasses, I've got greater knapweed, I've got birdsfoot trefoil, I've got red clover, and because they're just allowed to grow, they just grow as tall as they can, and it's absolutely amazing. And sometimes I think, oh god, this is such a mess, but I can mow it any time, and I can also mow bits of it at any time, and I can clip bits as well. So I get a lot of hedgehogs coming in, and they're always knocking stuff over. It drives me around the bend. But I just get my secateurs out and just cut things down. And so I've got bits that are more managed and bits that are less managed. And yeah, it's looking quite messy at the moment. But I think, going back to your original point, I mean, I let my grass grow between the end of May and August, and that just, those sort of 2.5 months, 3 months of wildness just enables so many caterpillars to feed on the grasses, so many bees to feed on the wildflowers. I get goldfinches coming in. It's a really urban area. I get goldfinches in my front garden eating greater knapweed seed, and the benefits of doing this, I think, outweigh any fear of mess. And I know that in August I can cut it down and it can all look really tidy again. So what I would do is just give it a go. If you don't like it, you can cut it, and that's not the end of the world. But I pretty much guarantee you'll love it, because it's so exciting. And I've had all these beautiful centurion flies this week just going in and out, and they're beautiful flies with these beautiful golden bodies. And it's just fascinating. Every time I go out into the garden, I see something different. So I go for it.
That's good advice. Just go for it. And if you don't like it, just cut it back a little bit. that's the best way. That's
gardening.
That's fantastic. That's gardening, isn't it? Experiment and see what happens.
Yeah, you can plant a tree, you can chop it down if you want to, but you'll love the tree, so just keep it. Yeah.
Brilliant. I've just got a thought as well. I mean, there's a lot of talk at the moment about sort of rewilding, which obviously have to focus on that sort of large areas of the UK, but sort of large areas in the countryside, really. But in a way, our gardens form a large network of land, which, if we all do small bits, like Kate, you've done with your meadow creation, your garden and pond, then together, collectively, that forms quite a large sort of rewilding project in a sense. So we can all be rewilding in little bits.
Our gardens have this huge potential collectively to, they take up more space than all our wildlife preserves. We have this amazing power to transform the livelihoods, really, of nature. But connecting our gardens is really important. So digging holes beneath our fences so that hedgehogs and other species can travel between them is a really important thing to do.
That's a very important point that you've just made there, Kate, and that's really part of the work that the wildlife trusts do, is all about creating a nature recovery network. It's all about the importance of all of the small spaces and the large spaces all joined up, and that's really what we want to explore with this event, is really showcasing that urban plays a really important part of that nature recovery network. So thank you for that. So David, there's a question I think would be probably best placed for you. So Jean has asked that her friend in Grantham has been wondering why the 2 pigeons have roosted on a neighbour's TV aerial in the past 6 years, but recently have been joined by a lot of smaller birds this year. Shed any light on that? Why they have
Firstly, when Jean talks about her friends' pigeons, are they feral pigeons, wood pigeons? What kind of pigeons are they? Secondly, I doubt they'd be actually roosting on the aerials, because pigeons, well, wood pigeons especially, tend to roost in trees along with collared doves, and joined by a lot of smaller birds. Well, maybe she's noticing more birds because, you know, during lockdown people just did, you know, because people had more time to sort of look up and notice, which was great. I noticed that myself in terms of the numbers of people, like my friends, contacting me and saying, I've just had this in the garden. I've never seen that before. And what is this? And how come I've got loads of robins in my garden now? They probably have always been there. It's just that we've never been around to see them. But I think it's great that Jean's friend seen so many birds in her garden. That is, or even on a roof or on an aerial. That's fantastic. And long may that continue.
Oh, well, we hope so. I mean, Jean, if you do have any further information about the type of pigeons, please do pop it in the chat. We'll go back to Kate for a question to Kate now. Kate, there's a question that came in from Abby in Hales Owen, and she was asking, what kind of advice would you give to a young person that's looking to develop their interest in nature and have a career in environmental conservation? So whether it's like you do as a wildlife gardener, or what David does as a bird watcher, for example, what sort of best sort of top tip advice would you give to somebody that's looking to start out?
I just go out and do it. I mean, well, go out and enjoy nature. Go out and, you know, if you can get on an allotment waiting list, then that's really useful to do. Well, that's, you know, I mean, there's lots of different ways to get into it. I sort of got into nature conservation via gardening, and I do think gardening is one of the most important things we can do really as individuals, to make a difference to nature. So, you know, if you don't have a garden, then I would try and get an allotment. You could join your local wildlife trust, join Birmingham Black Country Wildlife Trust, and you know, and go and join transects and go and do things that you know, go to the events that they organise, which I think is really, and you know, it's what they're there for. It's one of the most brilliant things that the Wildlife Trust do. You know, they get people out. They organise these wonderful events. And yeah, I think just, you know, I mean, I've got friends who are training to be ecologists now. You can look at local courses and see what you need to do to train to be an ecologist. But honestly, I just think getting out there and doing it in some capacity is the best foot forward, really, because as well as learning valuable skills and work experience, you'll absolutely love it too.
So get out there, muck in, get involved with whatever you can. That's good advice.
Yeah.
Thanks, Kate. Thank you. It looks like we have a couple more questions come through. So we've got a question here for you, David. So we have a question from Anthony on the Zoom chat. It's a question specifically for you. So Anthony is a question about the expense of bird food. He's spending a lot of money on mealworms, and he wonders, obviously the birds can't get enough of them, but they're quite expensive, and if you'd recommend any cheaper alternative.
Is he using live mealworms or dried ones? Because dried ones could be an option as well.
Well, Anthony, just say he's buying live mealworms. So that could be a good top tip there for Anthony. Is it's dried? Okay.
Yeah, I mean, mealworms are great though, obviously, because, you know, they provide protein for those insectivorous birds like robins and dunnocks. But yeah, I mean, if you can't do live ones, then definitely go dried. But you can also try other foods. For those ground birds. I mean, they're not partial, they are partial, so I say, to things like raisins and things like that. So, but yeah, I mean, mealworms are great. One tip also when it comes to feeding birds, especially ground feeding birds, is that try and feed them in a tray that you can actually take into the house every evening. Because if you feed them and leave the food out overnight, or even put the food out late evening thinking that they'll feed before going to bed, you may be attracting the local population of rats. So it's always best to keep temptation out of their way.
That's a good tip there. So some dried fruit could be a cheaper alternative, Anthony. And whilst we're on the subject of bird food, some of you may not know that nationally the wildlife trusts have a relationship with a fantastic birdseed provider called Vinehouse Farm. And I'll ask Andy just to share the link on the chat to you to the Vinehouse Farm website. If you are looking at buying bird food or any other kind of wildlife garden produce for feeding hedgehogs, for example, it's a great place to go because they farm in a very sustainable way, and they also give 4% of their sales to the local wildlife trusts as well. So this is a question from Sarah, and Sarah's question is about moving house and transforming gardens. She wants to know how you can keep wildlife safe as you alter their habitats to make a change, for example, in a garden, and then reintroduce wildlife once the change has taken place. Now, anybody who's read your book will know that you have done a lot of transforming a concrete area into a garden. So what tip would you have there for transforming garden and keeping wildlife safe?
Well, I think certainly with this garden, with my garden that I wrote Bumblebee about, the garden didn't have much wildlife in it because it was decked, and I took the decking up and planted a garden. But with the garden that I've got currently, it was an established garden. It just wasn't as wildlife friendly as I would have liked it to be. And I remember sort of sitting in the kitchen looking outside and seeing this blackbird taking great interest in a shrub that I was going to chop down the next week, and just thinking, oh, please don't start nesting in there because that will just cause loads of problems. So I think it's really lovely that you're being mindful of disturbing or not disturbing the wildlife before you start. I think I was very lucky in that the blackbird didn't start nesting, and I just was able to completely gut the garden and replant it, and then the wildlife came back naturally. I mean, you don't really have to reintroduce wildlife to a garden. The wildlife will just return, so the birds will just come back. I would probably just avoid doing it in nesting season. Make little mitigations. So if you're taking apart one area of the garden, make a habitat pile. Just pile up everything that you have taken down, and wildlife can just use that for shelter, and literally everything will use a habitat pile for shelter. Frogs, toads, hedgehogs, birds even sometimes, slow worms, loads of invertebrates. They'll just go in this habitat pile, and then, gradually you can sort of take that apart and, recreate it in other parts of the garden, or you can keep it there, or, whatever. So yes, you're always going to displace some things, but just try and avoid doing it during breeding season. So if you've got a lawn and the grass has grown a bit long, then wait until September before you get rid of it, because you'll have caterpillars and other things living in the long grass until then. So I would gen up on life cycles, gen up on different wildlife. I mean, don't empty a compost bin until sort of autumn, in case you've got slow worms breeding in there, that sort of thing. Find out how the wildlife lives, what it's likely to be doing at certain points of the year, and then tailor what you do depending on what wildlife you've got in and how it's living. I think that would be my advice.
Thanks, Kate. That's great. Sarah, hopefully that's answered your question. Oh, she says thanks. It makes perfect sense. Brilliant. That's great. So David, we had a question come into us early before we started filming, and that question was about species such as foxes and starlings have adapted to the urban environments that they live in by changing their diets and changing their behaviour. Can you think of any other species that have adapted in such a way to thrive in our urban environments?
Well, I think most species that have been successful have had to adapt in some way. So looking at things like even blackbirds, research has shown that blackbirds living and breeding in urban areas are actually much more productive than the ones living in woodlands. Part of the reason is because their territories are smaller and there's plenty of food. It doesn't always work that way because, for example, the blue tit you know, a very popular bird that you see in the garden is actually less successful in urban areas than it would be in its natal woodlands. And part of the reason for that is the fact that there's a lack of caterpillars, and that's where Kate comes in. Kate's been amazing tonight, telling us about what to do in gardens and stuff, and it's very important that we actually do that. Because one shocking thing I've heard, Kate, I don't know if you've heard this, but a lot of people I've been speaking to, and I've also gauged it from looking around, have suddenly become gardeners, which is great. But then they're cutting back hedgerows and they're trimming things that they wouldn't normally do until the autumn, which is obviously affecting nesting birds. And on top of that, I was alarmed to look on Twitter and see people shoving their phones into nests of birds to show people the chicks, which was like cardinal rule number one not to do, because obviously that, you know, the parents could desert and all that sort of stuff. So maybe for the next time we need to kind of educate people to let them know, but you know, you can't be doing that sort of stuff. So hopefully there isn't the next time, but you know, I think that's one thing that has to be learned from this time around as well. But yeah, I think, you know, many birds have, and many animals have actually got a habit or behavioural change, which I suppose most of it actually is the fact that they accept humans more. And that's the great thing about urban birding. You can actually approach birds that normally in the countryside you can never get within half a mile of. I mean, the classic example is a wood pigeon. You go to the countryside, how many wood pigeons have you actually walked up to in the countryside? You can't do it, it's impossible. Go to Trafalgar Square, they're walking up to you. So it just shows the difference. So I think it's largely to do with the fact that they are more accepting of humans, and more often than not, hopefully they're less likely to be predated or attacked by us in an urban area.
That's great, thank you. That's interesting. Kate, there's a question that's just popped through. Is it worth building a bug hotel if the garden already has areas such as rocks and a pond and a log store, etc.? So I think she's thinking very specifically of bug hotels there. Would you give some advice to Sharon on that for us?
I'm going to be a bit controversial here and say that I don't rate bug hotels. Bee hotels, absolutely, 100%. Specifically for solitary bees, they're amazing. Bug hotels, I just think they've tried to cater for too many species, and they tried to put too many species all in one area together where they wouldn't normally be. So Sharon, no, I would say no. If you've got log piles, rocks, a pond, then I wouldn't build a bug hotel. I would make sure you've got a log pile near your pond. I would make sure you've got an open compost heap. That's really important. Composting is so important for wildlife, and so many people just compost in plastic bins where the wildlife can't access it. An open compost heap close to your pond will just enable the amphibians, the slow worms, the grass snakes, whatever you've got in your garden, hedgehogs, anything, all creatures, to be able to just go and shelter there either at night or to nest or to hibernate or whatever. So no, that's a short answer, I would say.
So they don't do any harm, having a bug hotel?
They don't do any harm. They don't do any harm, but I think if you've got individual habitats such as a log pile or a rock pile or an open compost heap, then I would keep those. And I would, if you don't have anything and you're thinking about doing it, then I would prioritise creating those over making a bug hotel, because I just think sometimes bug hotels can cater for too many species all in one space.
You champion the natural habitat rather than but if somebody in a flat, for example, they only had a balcony, would that then be sufficient potentially?
Well, bee hotels are amazing. Bee hotels are, consist of a box with some bamboo canes in it, and those are absolutely brilliant because you get solitary bees using them. With a bug hotel, I mean, it's a very woolly. There's no real definition, and I think sometimes a lot of retailers will market things as one thing when it's actually another thing or whatever. But if you've got a box with some bamboo canes in it, then that's a really brilliant habit for solitary bees. I think if you've got a box with bamboo canes and then underneath it are some pine cones, then you're creating a habitat, or it's usually retailers that do this, and they've got this lovely sort of habitat for the bees above, and then beneath in the pine cone habitat you've got a habitat for spiders, and spiders eat bees. So I would say stick with the bee hotel or stick with the natural habitats. But bug hotels, it tends to be quite a confusing habitat. You tend to get predator-prey relationships you tend to be building environments for predators and prey in one space. And I've seen some good examples, but I've also seen some not so good examples.
That's fascinating, Kate. I've learned something new. Did not know that. So I really hope, Sharon, that answers your question. It sounds like if Sharon's already got rocks and a log store in her garden, that Sharon's done a good job by the sound of it. We're just going to end with one final question to David. I think this is the very last question now. So it's just really your thoughts on new developments and the integration and the provision of habitats with new development. So things like should swift boxes, for example, or bat boxes, what's your thoughts on them actually being compulsory in new developments?
Well, I think exactly that. It should be compulsory because it takes no effort and it's very little cost compared to the actual overall cost of the development. I mean, swift boxes, they can be built into the house. They're sort of negative spaces in terms of, it doesn't affect the structure or anything, but it's a great thing for swifts as well as the bat boxes as well. I mean, I think that developers should be doing more developments where, they have ponds and woodlands incorporated in with the estate so that kids can grow up being used to that from birth, and seeing blue and green as well as the grey, but plenty of blue and green. And it will negate the need, I suppose, in later life for them to feel that they have to chuck a stolen scooter in the lake, because they will have grown up with it and they will respect it. And I think that if that is kind of brought in now for future generations, and also along with that, there is some kind of nature education going on at the same time, then that's the best way forward as far as I'm concerned. We've got too much grey going on in our cities, and we need to get more green and blue spots, and we also need to be educating people more. And I think education is a very strong point, because we can lead into a whole different conversation here, but education is such an important element. And it's not just educating children, it's also getting their families involved, because you can get a child really enthused about nature and then they go home to parents who have no interest and it just dies there. So it's all about getting them involved. And I've been saying quite a lot recently, teachers that I've met have said, oh, well, the thing is, I don't really know anything about, nature. If someone, if a kid comes up to me with a bug, I wouldn't know what it was. And I think to myself, well, tell little Johnny or little Mary or whatever, go and research it. Tell us what it is. Come in tomorrow and give us a little presentation on it. Let us all learn about it. And then I think the kid will be really thrilled, because they are teaching everyone else. They're not only learning about stuff themselves, but they're teaching others, including their parents or teachers. And I think that's the way to go forward, to get everyone involved, because it's such a great thing, nature. And it's such a shame that people don't respect it enough. And I know that during lockdown, people, were really getting connected and stuff. My fear is that once things start running again, people have very short memories, and you only have to look at the beaches after all the hordes have been on recently, and the amount of garbage, plastics and paper and boxes and stuff they leave behind. People haven't learned, and they need to learn these things. And I think we have to start now with the kids. Start now, not tomorrow, now.
Thanks, David. I think there's some really, really good points there. And I mean, one of my hopes with obviously the situation we're in now is it's increasing the importance of that kind of outdoor education for kids. Obviously, we have quite large class sizes, and having lots of people together is an issue, but having children learning outside obviously can help with issues we may have going forward. So I think we covered some really interesting points there. I really enjoyed that. I hope everyone watching did too, and I hope Kate and David enjoyed taking part?
I have shared the link within the chat for everybody for our 40-year anniversary appeal. There's lots of lovely thank yous coming through on the chat, lots of big thanks coming through to David and to Kate, everybody saying well done, what a fantastic talk, so that's brilliant. So it just left to remain to say a huge thank you to everybody who's joined us on the Zoom chat today. You've made the event fantastic with sharing all your wonderful questions. I'd like to say a huge thank you to Andy for helping me out with this event this evening. I'd also like to say a huge thanks to Sarah and to Chris, who are listening in the background, who have helped us out with the promotion of the event, as well as a string of volunteers in the background as well. And last but not least, a huge thank you to David and for Kate for giving up your evening and for joining us and for answering all the questions. If we find that there were some questions that we weren't able to answer live, we will put them to you and we'll share them on Facebook next week. So thank you everybody again for joining. I will share the video again just one more time in case anybody didn't catch it, but wishing you all a lovely weekend and stay wild everybody. Take care.